News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline. My guest this evening is a cyber security specialist, Mr. Asela Waidyalankara. Sri Lanka in the last several months, put it that way, has never really experienced the level of free expression by the people. We had Aragalaya, that's what I'm talking about. And Aragalaya saw a level of free speech and expression by not only the youth, not only the farmers, but the whole country, all over the place. It started off with the farmers, of course, protesting the stupidity of a fertilizer policy and a move towards an all-organic state. But Aragalaya started this whole level of voices of, some call it dissent, but voices of frustration against good governance, which is what they wanted, and it was responsible for a wholesale change in Sri Lanka's governance. So, good evening to you, Asela Waidyalankara. Thank you for coming on my program.
Good evening, Faraz.
I want to know, what is so good? What benefit will Sri Lanka have in the introduction of this cyber security bill at this particular juncture? We're just trying to come out of an economic mess. That has been intersped with various discomfort amongst the people because of the level of government interference in free speech. We've had the case of various people being arrested. We had a case of a British tourist who actually was in Sri Lanka and felt really happy that the man who's now the president said, oh, you can come here, you can protest, you can protest. But this particular woman was the subject of a deportation order for posting stuff on Facebook. So are we safe with this security bill, cyber security bill, and do we need it today?
Thank you for having me, Faraz. And that's an important question that has been, when we are discussing the cyber security bill, it's bill in its current form.
Yes.
We hope it will be enacted soon. I will start with the first point you made on democracy. Democracy entails rights and freedoms. So one must ensure that even those rights and freedoms extend into cyberspace. And what's important as part of these technology regulations, because these technology regulations are not created as silos. They are compliant and take an inspiration from global regulations. For example, Sri Lanka's Personal Data Protection Act, which was passed last year, was an important piece of legislation in the technology space within the country. And it was the first of such regulations in this Southeast Asia. In India only now passed a similar legislation, in fact it was yesterday.
Yeah.
When you look at that, we are trying, these type of regulations, and they take inspiration from countries like the EU, they aim to strengthen people's rights. They aim to foster democratic expression. And they aim to give that space by ensuring the overall security and stability of critical national infrastructure, the systems around it, to ensure that there is space for dissent, expression, and even protest, like you mentioned.
But are there aspects of the bill in its present form that concern you as a citizen of a robust democracy here in Sri Lanka?
Before I comment, I must be thankful for the ministry for giving us, the industry, an opportunity to sit with us, to exchange our views.
They've done that?
They've done that, and actually we sat for the consultation for the industry last Friday. And I must commend here the drafting committee of the Data Protection Act as well as the Cyber Security Bill. They were far more open to discuss, debate, and even amend certain parts of the regulation, and they were open for constructive criticism. So I think admirable, given some of the ways the other laws are being drafted in the country. We must admire the way there's a wider consultation in the process, especially with the industry. because as cybersecurity professionals, this impacts us as well, and wider impact is seen by the industry and organizations. So it's important that there is a chance that we get to express ourselves, which we did.
Yes. But I want to ask you, Asela, why is it that quite often, if I'm talking to some of my sources, for example, they'll say to me, oh, call me on WhatsApp. Quite often people say, call me on Signal, call me on Telegram. You know, why is that then? What are people concerned about?
I think there is an increasing movement to ensure your privacy. And that is something stemming from a global movement to ensure that there is a consciousness on your individual privacy, that you don't want your personal or very private conversations, or in your case, an informant, those conversations to be, eavesdropped by anyone, to put it mildly. And therefore, these global organizations, mind you, these organizations are not based in Sri Lanka, Faraz. They're not under Sri Lankan law. But you feel a certain degree of comfort using WhatsApp.
My immediate concern is that the people in Sri Lanka are not listening to me, because I'm not really concerned about, my stories are to do with my country, right here and now. So I often wonder why it is that if we are living not under the watch of sort of Big Brother hovering over us, listening in and knowing what we are doing. And as we saw during the early days of the protest, don't you remember, they sort of shut down social media? It's a reaction that's not only in Sri Lanka but in other parts of the world. They immediately, the first thing they do is shut down the social media.
Well, unfortunately, that is the precedent even for some other governments as well. We see the same precedent set by the French authorities. When there was rioting in France, the French police took initiative to limit certain aspects of social media, which is not something which obviously interferes with freedom of expression. But of course, there is a debate on the other side that in order to establish a certain degree of, order, that there are certain measures are necessary, and this is checks and balances. We always maintained as technologists to make such an order. For example, for the TRC to make such an order, that order should be based in some level of transparency, which is, I think, the theme that you wanted to discuss here as well.
Indeed.
And how does one arrive at that decision? Is there any political influence on that decision? Or is it purely due to, for example, logical reasons or national security-based reasoning that such an effort takes place? So I think that justification and rationale needs to be transparent in the process.
So what are the salient features of this cybersecurity bill? And in your opinion, are they good, they're bad, mediocre?
Well, I'll come back to you. I think there's an open question as well. I'll answer that while I'm answering your current question. So this bill envisages a cybersecurity agency that will be created. And this will have wide-ranging powers to look at.
Who would make up the members of this
agency?
Well,
as per the bill, in its current state, there are EXCO representatives from the Treasury. There's another agency called the Cyber Defense Command, the TRC, ICTA, and I believe there's one more person. So that would
who would choose these people? Because by virtue of their office, they'll be in there.
This is EXCO. On top of that, the President has his prerogative to appoint 4 members, and the Act goes on of showing eminence within the industry. Of course, there is a comment that the industry, as private sector, we made, that it mentions public sector as well as state-owned enterprises and private sector. So our point of constant was let's not dip into the public sector again, because anyway, by virtue of the EXCO, there are 4 or 5 public sector members. So let's consult the industry, which is very robust, very vibrant, and let's get representation from the industry itself in order to fill the 4 vacancies. But I must emphasize here, Faraz, and that's probably another question you asked previously. Security of tenure
Yes,
is one
that's one of my questions.
is one important and salient aspects which I feel needs to be strengthened, because my point is this is a agency with wide-ranging powers,
Yeah.
and is in charge of the policy landscape for cybersecurity in Sri Lanka. Its composition and its direction cannot change, for example, when a president changes, because that shouldn't be the case. Policy should not change when politicians change. I think this is the
Yes,
root of all
because
evil.
It is, because in public appointments in Sri Lanka, we often find that there is no security of tenure. And that is the whole problem. When the president, who has untrammeled powers, like almost none before, when he makes his decision, no one can challenge, and then he can change them at his whim and fancy.
So I think these type of checks and balances, and this is the feedback that we've given, we requested some checks and balances, and we requested that, for example, when these appointments are made, they should be made within a framework where the industry recognizes these figures.
Right.
It shouldn't be people who are completely alien to the field of cybersecurity, and it shouldn't be, for example, a relation of so and something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that is important. Subject matter experts, industry expertise needs to come into these policy bodies to ensure that policy consistency remains. And this is why I emphasize on security of tenure as well.
Yeah.
Because when you have security of tenure, you ensure policy consistency. And this is sadly something lacking. When you take this agency, it has a wide power in terms of coursing and charting the direction of cybersecurity policy in the country, as well as being the point agency internationally talking to other countries on cybersecurity. Now, for us, cybersecurity has matured a lot in other countries. For example, in the United States, there's an ambassador at large for cybersecurity. In the European Union, it's the same. Many other countries are following suit. In Australia, for example, there is a minister for cybersecurity looking at specifically the discipline of cybersecurity.
Right.
So this is the kind of maturity globally that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So when we are trying to deal with such mature global frameworks, we should have an agency that ensures there is policy consistency as well as independence to deal with a charter policy path that is right for the Sri Lankan citizen, and that is important.
So how much of this, the appointments to this new authority via the bill and so on, how much of meritocracy is spoken about, how much of pragmatism, how much of honesty, or put it another way, how much of morality, how much of righteousness, and how much of insight is envisaged in the bill and in the appointment of this authority? Because after all, as you said, it's going to have wide-ranging powers.
So two important checks and balances I see is they make reference to people of 15 years of cybersecurity and ICT experience, which itself narrows the field. You can't have a person who is very alien to the sector of cybersecurity coming in. Some of the wording, if you look at the wording of the bill, meritocracy is built in. On top of the board of directors that is to be appointed, there is another advisory board made up of experts and subject matter experts, again envisaged from the industry.
How do they choose them? How do they propose to choose them?
They're saying who had shown excellence in the area of cybersecurity. So that is the wording that they have used.
They have not specifically said that we will ask for applications.
Of course, I think when the board is appointed, it's probably understood that they will have a term of reference and they will go about the procedural aspects of it.
Yeah.
I believe we will allow the board to do it. But at least there is guidance somewhat, because again, for us, they have taken inspiration from global regulations. I think that is important. Because of that and because of the nature of it, and of course one important aspect is they have emphasized that there is a civilian cybersecurity agency. I think that's important.
Indeed. We are in conversation with Asela Waidyalankara, who is a cybersecurity specialist, and it's now time for the Primetime News. We'll take a short break, take a peek at those headlines, and rejoin Asela Waidyalankara. See you on the other side.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
Thousands attend the annual feast of the Shrine of Our Lady of Madhu in Manna. Vatican praises President's efforts on national peace and reconciliation. 600 university teachers migrated within 6 months. Professionals urge authorities to consider their demands. Minister Bandula comments on professionals leaving the country. Permission granted with cabinet covering approval for electricity emergency purchasing. Sri Lanka scraps Hambantota oil refinery project agreement. Media Minister confirms that the airtime of Channel I was leased to Lanka Group for 25 million rupees per month.
Hi guys! See you at the Thomian Fun Fair on the 18th of August. We'll see you this Friday at the St. Thomas's College ground for the Thomian Fun Fair. Let's have a lot of fun. See you.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And welcome back to Newsline. I'm in conversation with Asela Waidyalankara, cybersecurity specialist. Asela, tell me, cybersecurity, it's like seen to be sort of a geek world and so on. How much of understanding is there amongst ordinary people?
Put it this way, Sri Lanka last year crossed 50% overall in terms of digital literacy, not
Right.
computer literacy. Computer literacy remains quite low still, it's about 35%.
Yeah.
But when you say digital literacy for us, it means the ability to navigate a digital device, meaning a smartphone.
Yeah.
It's the figure is much higher in an urban setting, it's close to 70%. But overall, when you average it out, it's crossed 50%.
Right. Is that good?
That's a very good thing, and that's
How does that compare with the region?
very, very good. In fact, even if you look at India, the figure is much lower, despite having a high digital e-government.
What about
and
Bangladesh and Malaysia, Thailand?
Well, if you look, the reason for that success is actually the telcos have been very successful in spreading the mobile broadband as well as fixed line broadband within the country. I know there are some issues in terms of certain areas not being covered, but overall, as a country, we can be very happy that we have relatively stable 4G connectivity. And in fact, we were the first in the region to even trial out 5G connectivity. There were 2 operators in the country. It's only because of the economic crisis that we were not able to commercially launch 5G. In fact, India beat us to it. But if you look back, 3G, 4G, all of that, we were the first in the region. So we've demonstrated leadership in terms of digital infrastructure, especially in the telecommunication space. And I must say, the telecommunication engineers and professionals in Sri Lanka are quite sought after in the region as well.
But there is this sort of outflow of talented people. We saw on the news earlier, there's people concerned about all these professionals are leaving because our economy is in such dire straits. But tell me, there's a rise in cybercrime and, dare I say, a lack of digital forensics by the various authorities in the country, like the intelligence and the police and so on. How does that help?
It goes back to the point
Or
I've
it doesn't
made.
help even?
It doesn't help because, see, when we cross that figure of 50% in digital literacy, and let's say if we forecast maybe in the next 2 years, we will hit 70%. That means 70% of the majority of the population is able to do and navigate through a digital device. Therefore, you can see what's happening now, a correlation in rise of cybercrime. I believe the official figures state about 3 times rise in cybercrime since the COVID-19, when we had the lockdown and we had more and more people exposed to digital systems, digital platforms, and so on. So when you have that, it's important to, for example, complement law enforcement in the way they address digital evidence and the way they present digital evidence without contaminating digital evidence. So I think this is a sort of a skill and capacity gap that exists within the country, because we see a lot of crimes happening right now involving a mobile smartphone, involving unsolicited images being circulated, involving extortion scams happening through social media. Now all of that encompasses digital evidence being collected, processed, analyzed and presented to court for conviction.
And also that the government authorities are keeping tabs on the movement of the people, and therefore their ability to protest, constitutionally guaranteed, is sort of impinged upon.
But more, yes, that I agree. And that should be monitored with checks and balances. And that's
is there any sort of criminal offences in this proposed bill?
The criminal offence is that if, for example, if you talk about the cybersecurity bill, they identify and designate what is known as critical national infrastructure.
And what is that?
Critical national infrastructure, anyone living in Sri Lanka in 2022 will tell you exactly what critical national infrastructure is. For example, there are entities, agencies, institutions that are required for society and an economy in a country to function. For example, the Ceylon Electricity Board, the Ceylon Petroleum, the state LPG provider, ports, the highways, stock exchange, the banking sector, the telecommunication sector, utilities, energy, healthcare, all of these areas or sectors form what we call critical national infrastructure. So these are the entities that sort of require for a state to function. What is envisaged here is, for example, if there is a cyber incident spreading across one or more of these industries, there are enough examples globally where an entire country is brought to its knees with the particular cyber attack or cyber incident. And right now we don't have a point agency, we don't have a proactive way of dealing with that. We have a reactive agency, which is CERT, and they're doing quite a bit within their limited scope. But we need a higher authority, a higher agency, comparable to international agencies, because right now, Faraz, and this is where it's important, and I think people miss the point of cybersecurity being a technical subject, even in trade negotiations, this aspect of what is the common standards and frameworks that you have for cybersecurity and data privacy, by extension, are brought up in trade negotiations. So these are areas that you probably generally won't associate technology-based regulations.
Yeah.
The EU very recently has proscribed human rights standards for manufacturers sending it to EU countries. Very soon, they will extend it to the technology space as well. So imagine Sri Lankan IT companies will have to adhere to certain standards. They anyway do. They look at GDPR. But imagine more tougher compliances. We can navigate that and we can actually become competitive by aligning to global standards where we have frameworks and acts and legislations of this nature to ensure, because we are talking digital economy, we are trying to reconfigure our economy to make it more growth focused. How we do that, reconfigure our economy to make it more growth focused. How we do that is to ensure that the frameworks are in place, and the frameworks will allow us to be competitive, not only competitive, to be compliant globally as well. And this is what's important. Before some other power comes into us and prescribes to us, it's important that we show, by the way, we have our own legislation, homegrown, consulted with the industry, and these are the regulations that you have to deal with us.
Why are there concerns, security concerns, they talk of national security concerns in the sale of, let's say, Sri Lanka Telecom? What are those concerns legitimate?
I think, Faraz, it's like this. No one organization or agency is going to ensure cybersecurity in Sri Lanka.
Right.
That is a fallacy. What we need is a countrywide approach to cybersecurity. Just like we look at national security, not in its silo point of view, we need to look at cybersecurity also in a wider, more policy-based outlook. If we don't do that, listen, selling a state telco or not is not going to degrade your cybersecurity in any way or form, because this particular state entity did have cybersecurity issues when it was under government. as well. So that doesn't really ensure a higher compliance of cybersecurity. But what we need is a watchdog agency where they prescribe, and which is what is envisaged here, they prescribe the checks and balances, they prescribe the controls. And of course, the carrot and the stick approach, if you don't prescribe to our controls, there will be fines to you because you have not made your information, your systems and your data safer. Therefore, the citizens can transact with you. The citizens can entrust you, and you are the custodian of that information. That is important. That, I believe, strengthens the pillars of democracy. And I think that is pertinent.
Indeed, indeed. But, you know, if my question is, if Sri Lanka Telecom presents a particular problem, then what about these other telcos? Surely one of them is majority owned by an overseas company.
All of them are.
There you go. So what concerns should we be having there then?
Well, the concern shouldn't be about ownership. The concerns should be about governance and controls. And this comes back to the point for us. For example, British Telecom is completely owned by an external party. There are enough and more examples that ownership does not demonstrate higher degree of compliance. In fact, it degrades compliance. It degrades governance. And what we want is, as you always champion, good governance. The good governance comes in with controls. The controls are the process, not the destination. So when we have that, that is important. So we must not fixate on ownership. I don't think that will really solve our cybersecurity problems. What we must fixate on is to make sure the system is robust and the systems and the policies that we prescribe are adhered to, because that's how globally that they've dealt with it. And I think that has worked. If we do that, we are able to better transact globally, saying that these are our standards and this is what we have and this is where we hold our organizations to. And therefore, we are better equipped to have a global conversation. Ensuring one organization is owned by the state, I don't think serves any purpose.
And as we come towards the end of our program, I'm being asked a question. What aspects of this bill, proposed bill, should people who are contemplating protesting and so on have? What concerns? The alternative voices?
Well, concerns, this is more of a oversight agency along the lines of TRC, along the lines of...
can it be used by the government? I think the bottom line question is, can it be used by the government against the people?
Yeah, well, put it simply, without the correct checks and balances, any agency can be used against the people. Right. What is important is to have meritocracy, like you very correctly mentioned, professionals occupying places of leadership within these organizations, and technically competent individuals and subject matter experts, because then you will have a pushback. Might I remind you even, the last time that the social media regulations were taking place, the then TRC Director General resigned in protest. So that is the kind of caliber of people that we would need to ensure that these organizations remain true to their purpose rather than politicized.
Asela Waidyalankara, thank you very much for having been on Newsline. Thank you. And that's the way it was on Newsline. It's now time for the primetime news from that wonderful primetime news team at News First. Take care, have a great evening as much as you can, and God bless you all.